It gives me very great pleasure to introduce to you your Secretary-Treasurer, Lori Mayhew, for the Finance Report.
Next time, can you guys play the Monty Python song? I've got 40,000 pounds in my pajamas. Good afternoon, everyone. I trust you all had a good lunch. We had a great energy in the room this morning, and so let's try to keep that going. And I find myself following Mayor Stewart again this year, as I did 3 years ago, so it's everything's familiar. Before I start my report, I would like to take a moment to say that I am honored to be addressing you once again as the Secretary-Treasurer of our union. Testing. Okay. It is a privilege to be serving our members in this capacity. I think back to when I was first elected Secretary-Treasurer, along with Jerry as President, in 1999, and all the elections I've gone through since then. I must say, it is a pretty stressful time when elections come around. Even those times when you're almost certain you've got enough votes, it's still stressful. But it's after the election when, in reality, the stress should begin. It's easy to promise things during a campaign. Delivering on them is another thing. As your Secretary-Treasurer, I expect and welcome our members to hold me accountable for the finances of our union. It's not a job I take lightly. That's okay. Okay. My notes say I knew what I was getting into in 1999, but I really didn't. And I think the first pictures post-election show that. I was like, but ever since then, as our union evolves and grows, I know what it means to be responsible for the union's finances and responsible to each and every one of you in this room and to the nearly 12,000 members of our union. Thank you for putting your trust in me. Let's continue to move up together over these next 3 years. And so here we are, 3 years later, at convention again. It's an important time for us to reflect on the past few years and work together to discuss and determine the best way to move forward and build our union. I want to take you back to where we were 3 years ago and see where we are now, and then take a look at where I think we're going. We last met in 2018 at this same location. Back then, our defense fund was sitting at $15.2 million. Our members at Cascades Casinos were off the job, respecting the picket line of members at the BCGEU who were on strike. We spent about $327,000 defending our members at arbitrations and labor board hearings. We had about 11,400 dues-paying members. Our members at Cascades were back to work after about 6 months of solidarity with their coworkers. In 2019, our defense fund was growing, although it was slow growth. It was sitting at $16 million by the end of that year. Our dues-paying membership levels were holding steady around 11,400. As you heard earlier from President Black, our members at Westminster Savings Credit Union were on strike in a bitter dispute. In addition to supporting these members, we spent close to $220,000 defending members at arbitrations and labor board hearings. As I worked on the budget for 2020, there was no reason to believe that things would change drastically in the near future. Things were going along in familiar patterns that had been established over the years, and it wasn't until the very end of 2019 that we had any idea of what was happening. But certainly, the scope of it had not yet been revealed. And then came 2020. Oh, 2020. When the pandemic hit and the economy shut down in March of 2020, the markets tumbled quite dramatically. Our defense fund dropped from the $16 million it had been at the end of 2019 to 13.8 at the end of March. This triggered Article 9.10b of our Constitution, increasing the amount to go into our defense fund from the 5% of dues revenue to 10%. At the same time, our members at casinos and car rentals were laid off. Many of our members were sent to work from home, and it was a very uncertain time for everyone. At our April meeting of the Executive Council, we moved to reduce our minimum dues to $0 per month, and they remain there today. Towards the end of 2020, we saw job action at both Kelowna Cabs and Vantage One Credit Union. In addition to supporting these members, we spent close to $475,000 at arbitrations and labor board hearings. The markets rebounded fairly quickly, and by June, our defense fund ticked over $15 million, and we were able to go back to our budgeted contribution level of 5% of dues revenue. By the end of the year, the fund had grown to just over $17 million. Our membership also grew, thanks to our organizers, to almost 11,800 dues-paying members. Also, as a result of the pandemic, our expenses were greatly reduced. All of our meetings had moved to being online, reducing expenses related to attending meetings. Luckily, we had started using an online platform a couple of years before the pandemic hit, so our learning curve with this was a lot less steep than that of other organizations. Like many employers, we also moved to working completely remotely. Our reps already had the capacity for this, but our admin and finance staff did not. Luckily, we had enough spare laptops for them, and we managed to get them all set up and able to work from home. The big question for us all was, how long would this situation last? I know I certainly did not expect to be still impacted by this pandemic at the end of 2020, but as we all know now, that's what happened. As I prepared the budget for 2021, things were still up in the air. What would the year be like? Would the pandemic still be going strong? What would be the impact on our local? I approached creating the 2021 budget with the thought that things would start to normalize by the end of the year, which is somewhat happening. Along with other organizations, we're dipping our toes back into the in-person waters. Our reps are starting to do more work in person with the membership. We had an in-person council meeting and a couple of in-person board meetings, and we're here in person for our own convention. It's a start. Overall, MoveUP has been relatively unscathed by the economic impacts of the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, our members at casinos and car rentals were laid off, but the majority of our members were able to keep working. As a result of this, our revenues remained quite strong. As our revenues have remained relatively steady, our expenses have continued to be lower than normal. This has been a help to our cash flow and has reduced our dependence on taking money out of the defense fund. So where are we at today? The markets have been doing well since the initial drop in March of 2020. As of the end of September 2021, our defense fund is valued at just over $19 million now. We've also continued to grow our membership, as you heard from our organizers this morning. As at the end of August of this year, we have just over 11,500 dues-paying members. So I just want to pause and explain, when I say dues-paying members as opposed to our membership, those are two different things, because not all of our members pay dues. Our minimum dues continue to be $0, so we don't have that income from those members at the car rentals who are laid off, so they don't get counted in that dues-paying members number. And while our organizing department is continuing to successfully organize new certifications for us, those members don't pay dues until they ratify a first collective agreement. So there's a bit of a lag in counting them as dues-paying members. Currently, fingers crossed, we don't have any active labor disputes, although we have authorized strike action if necessary for our members who work for the BCGEU as they look to negotiate a fair collective agreement with that employer. In fact, they are going to a final offer vote today and tomorrow, and we should know the result of that next week. We've also spent this year so far over $325,000 in arbitrations and labor board hearings. And it's about this time of the year that I turn my mind to the budget for next year. What will that look like? A lot of people were somewhat nervous about coming together for our last in-person council meeting. Do we schedule more of that for 2022? Can we safely predict that 2022 will be when COVID moves from pandemic to endemic? I expect, frankly, that 2022 will look a lot like 2021, continuing to move to normalcy, but wary of any setback. In the current stage of the BC reopening plan, we are allowed, obviously, to have indoor organized events. I expect that to continue into 2022, and we'll see more and more in-person events. Next year is also a bargaining year for the public sector. This means that ICBC, BC Hydro, the Transit Group, and Capilano University will all be bargaining a new collective agreement. That's about 80% of our membership who will be bargaining next year. Inflation is currently running about 4%. Most pundits in the financial world don't expect that to last for very long, but even in the short term, that has an impact on our expenses. This afternoon, you will be considering and debating a resolution to change how we fund our defense fund. Currently, our Constitution sets out that a certain percentage of our dues revenue that is to be taken out of operations and directed to the defense fund based on how large the defense fund is. The larger the fund, the less we put into it. At the same time, the larger the fund, the more it earns through investments. In 2020, we saw how much this leaves us at the whim of the markets. With the drop of the markets in March of 2020, the value of our defense fund fell below one of those thresholds in the Constitution. This meant that we had to double our contributions, as I said, from 5% of dues revenue to 10% until the fund once again rose over that trigger point. Luckily, this only took a couple of months, so the impact to our operations was not that severe. But it did get us thinking, there's got to be a better way to fund the defense fund. So the solution that's being proposed is to fund the defense fund on a per capita or per person basis out of the dues that we receive. The resolution is to take $1.50 per member from the dues we receive each month and put that into the defense fund. This will continue to grow the defense fund, but also free up some of our revenue to use in operations. So let's take a look at what that impact would have been on the 2021 budget. The budget was based on 11,600 dues-paying members. The current language of the Constitution had us budget $540,625 to take out of our revenue and put into the defense fund. With the proposed new funding model, we would have only taken out $208,800 to put into the defense fund, which would have left $331,825 in our operations for us to use. And of course, the timing of this resolution is pretty good. I'm in the process of finalizing the 2022 budget for Council to consider at our next meeting. And as we look ahead and think about, quote unquote, getting back to normal, whatever that means post-pandemic, I know that there are a lot of things that we could use that money for. And I know President Black has outlined some of that to Council in previous reports. There's a lot that I don't know about next year, but I do know this. Things will get better. They always do. Even when it looks pretty dark, and I must say that things are looking pretty dark right now for a number of reasons, I remember that the sun always rises, and my spirit rises with it. Charikala. Thank you.